Welcome back to ESBR Boxing's YouTube channel. Delighted as always to be joined by Owen and Paul. This is a debate. It's Team Beterbiev versus Team Smith video ahead of the big fight this Saturday in Montreal, Canada, between Artur Beterbiev and Callum Smith for Artur Beterbiev's world titles at light heavyweight. Gents, good to be joined by both of you. Hope no one goes over the top here. Glad this is on Zoom rather than in person. There could be a few tables turned over. But yeah, I want to know from both of you why you think your guy's going to win. Just for reference, Owen here thinks that Beterbiev is going to beat Callum Smith, and Paul thinks the opposite. Paul thinks Callum Smith is going to get the job done. Paul, going to go to you first. Callum Smith's the underdog in this fight. I know you like to back an underdog. Give us your first reason as to why you think Callum Smith gets the job done on Saturday night.
Yeah, mate, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to this debate. Yeah, mate, you're right. He is the underdog, and totally understandable and accurate as to why he is the underdog. It's clear to see why that's the case. So yeah, no arguments there. But as you said, I do like to back an underdog, and I'm not doing it just for the sake of it. I really do believe Callum Smith will come out victorious against Beterbiev. My first reason that I think this is I do believe that I believe Smith's getting Beterbiev at the perfect time. I believe Beterbiev is slightly past his best and perhaps on the slide. The reason for that is, he's 38 years old. Yeah, obviously up in the heavier weights, light heavyweight, cruiserweight, and heavyweight, you do tend to go on a little longer. But I think when you look at his last fight against Anthony Yarde, for example, just using that as an example, as the most recent example, a lot of people had him losing that fight prior to the stoppage. He looked easier to hit than he was in previous fights. Yes, he ended up getting the job done because he's a frighteningly big puncher. But for me, I think that Callum Smith is a better fighter than Anthony Yarde. And therefore, if Anthony Yarde is given Beterbiev a lot of issues, I think Callum Smith's more than capable of doing the same. Obviously, boxing styles makes fights. That's not always the way it works, but I just believe Callum Smith is getting Artur Beterbiev at the perfect time here.
Yeah, Beterbiev about to turn 39 years old. He's only had the 19 fights, and he has been out of the ring for a year. So I think you make some fair points there, Paul. I think it's kind of worth noting as well that fight between Anthony Yarde and Beterbiev was stopped in the 8th round, and at the time Yarde was winning on two of the judges' scorecards, I believe, and gave a very good account of himself. Owen, I'll let us know your response to what Paul said and give us your first point as to why you think Beterbiev gets the job done on Saturday.
Yeah, like Paul said, thank you for having me on. I think it's a massive fight. I just think off the basis of what Paul said, I'm going to flip it back on performances. If we're looking at how Beterbiev's looked, I know Callum Smith coming in the back in this, obviously knocking out Matthew Borderleek and Lenin Castillo. But before that, obviously outclassed by Canelo, no shame in that. But if you're going off performances, John Ryder beat Callum Smith, and I know Paul agrees with that as well. So I think it can easily be flipped for either of them. I think the big difference for me is, Callum Smith, he's been in with Canelo. Other than that, he hasn't been in with massively top level competition. He beat George Groves, but even George Groves himself sort of says he was past it at that point. I think Beterbiev, he's always been able to be hit. That's no secret. Even like Callum Johnson dropped him, and it's always his response to getting hit, and it's his response to being hurt. He always finds a way. Like Paul said, frighteningly big puncher. The main reason I think he's going to win is because Beterbiev's going to force the pace with Smith, and he's going to try and drag Smith into his fight. And if Smith goes looking for that knockout, it's a case of, can Smith stand and go and trade with Beterbiev? Absolutely not. So I do think it could almost be a case of Beterbiev outmans Callum Smith, forces the pace, puts the pressure on, and stops him.
Fair enough. No points. What points well made. Owen, are you concerned about Beterbiev's age at all? About, as we said, about to turn 39, a year out the ring, was losing to Yarde. Does that concern you? Does it not concern you? Talk us through that.
I think there's always going to be concerns. You know, you look at fighters, and as they get older each year, how much does it take out of them? Does it take anything out of their gas tank, punch resistance? You know, Tony Ballew hit the nail on the head before, where he said how many punches a fighter actually takes on average in a lifetime. So I think when you work out, obviously the sparring, etc., it's going to take it out of them. So it will be interesting to see how Beterbiev is, especially with a year out the ring. We know Beterbiev, it sounds mental to say, but he's almost sort of one-dimensional in terms of he's going to knock you out. It's what he's there to do. So there's always a small worry of it, but I think people looking into, for me, reading a lot of people saying, oh, he got caught in this fight, he got caught in that fight. Beterbiev has always been caught for me. You look at a lot of his fights, he gets in a lot of firefights, he's happy to stand and trade. He's happy to go into the trenches if needs be, and he always finds a way. So I'm still supremely confident that whatever Smith brings, I believe at times he is going to get caught, and he will get caught with a big Callum Smith shot. But I am still supremely confident that he'll take everything Callum Smith can bring forward. He'll adapt to what Smith's got and find the stoppage.
Great. Out of interest, Owen, I just want to get your opinion. Callum Smith and Anthony Yarde, who do you think would win? Who do you think would win that fight?
I think I'd edge it Anthony Yarde personally. I do really see it as a lot of closer fight than people make out. I think Yarde's issue has always been gas tank, and how would that fare up against Smith, who can, if needs be, could sort of box on the back foot. But I just think Yarde again forced the pace on Smith. We haven't really seen, bar the Canelo fight, we haven't really seen someone stick it on Smith, force the fight to him, and put him in positions where you're almost questioning how will he cope with it. So it's one of those. It's a 51-49 prediction, but I would edge for Anthony Yarde, yes.
Paul, gonna hand things right back to you. What do you think about Owen saying that Anthony Yarde would beat Callum Smith?
Yeah, it's fair enough. You know, say a lot of people would agree with Owen there. Make no bones about it. I think that when you look at it, yes, his 2 defeats in world title fights at light heavyweight, Anthony Yarde, he has put in real good performances. You know, ahead on the cards at the time of the stoppage against Beterbiev. A few years back when he fought Kovalev, you know, he shook Kovalev to his boots, almost got him out of there, and then yeah, as Owen alluded to there, gas tank let him down there, and he was just out in his feet, exhausted, and got stopped. And that was a Kovalev just before he really hit the decline as well. So yeah, I completely understand where Owen's coming from, with Yarde winning the fight against Smith. But I do personally think Callum Smith is better in almost, I would argue, every department than that. You know, he's got a superior height and reach advantage. He's bigger. I think he's a harder puncher than Anthony Yarde. Boxing IQ, kind of skill set. I just think he's better than Anthony Yarde in almost every department. And yeah, I think that if the two ever did fight, regardless of what happens against Beterbiev here, if Smith and Yarde ever did fight, I could see a Smith late stoppage.
Yeah. Owen, is there anything else you want to give us as a way of like strengthening your argument, whether it's any vulnerabilities you see in Smith, any kind of strength you see in Beterbiev, as we kind of round things off? Is there anything you want to add to your argument as to why Beterbiev beat Smith on Saturday?
I just think it's being in sort of Smith coming in with elite competition. And for me, it's, you look at resumes, although Beterbiev, you're not looking at it like a Mayweather CV or Canelo CV sort of thing. I just think Smith's only ever been in with elite company once. He hasn't really fought top level fighters, and I've said all this off camera as well, that obviously Paul will especially know, and I've said it to all you boys. I just think for me, Callum Smith he's a good fighter, but he's just never really done it for me. I think when I've watched majority of his fights throughout his career, and I've never really looked at him and thought you're elite. I just think I think basics being harsh, but obviously you look at Smith. I think the only way for me he beats him, obviously he'd either beat him on points or if he lands a big left hook. And I think Smith's going to be looking for that left hook all night, and whether it lands or not is another story. But I think it's just a case of, you even go back through the amateurs, Beterbiev, his record is unbelievable. He is, when you talk about the elite, Beterbiev is a name that will be mentioned. So I just think, again, it'll be Smith hasn't been in top company enough for me. And that will be his outdoings on Saturday night.
Is this a more competitive fight for Beterbiev than Yarde, would you say? Do you think it's a tougher fight for Beterbiev?
I think they pose different threats. I think Smith would box a lot more than Anthony Yarde would. From what I've seen of Yarde, I think Yarde brings the fight almost. We've seen it with where Paul said in previous world title fights where he has gassed out, but I do think that's not necessarily because his gas tank is so poor. It's because against Kovalev, he emptied the tank trying to get him out. So Yarde, he sort of, for me, it's Yarde will bring the fight, and he's game to sort of stand and trade, whereas I think Callum Smith would tend to box more. So again, I think it poses different threats, but if it's in terms of boxing ability, then Callum Smith is a better boxer than Anthony Yarde. But again, styles make fights, and I just think this would probably be more difficult for Beterbiev in terms of Smith having better boxing ability. But I just think Beterbiev's top level nature will see him find the stoppage.
Great. Just before we round off to predictions, Paul, is there anything else you want to add from your side here? Like if you want to like summarize kind of your key points as to why Callum Smith gets the job done, or anything you've not mentioned.
Yeah, as I mentioned at the beginning, the main reason is I do think Beterbiev is slightly past it. But apart from that, like I mentioned when we were talking about Anthony Yarde there, that Smith has all of the attributes, reach, height, size. I think that they're all playing into his favour over Beterbiev as well. Despite being a career super middleweight for most of his life, he is the naturally bigger man. I'm not saying he'll dwarf Beterbiev or anything like that. Beterbiev is massive as well. But yeah, I just think Smith. I think Smith's left. Everyone does say about his left hook. I mean, you can't ignore his left hook. The amount of stoppages he has with that left hook is incredible. I just think he has the style, and I've always thought I just think he has the style to trouble Artur Beterbiev. As soon as he moved up to light heavyweight, thought, you know what, I think he'll become a world champion. Who he'll become against, I'm not so sure. But mate, it just so happens that he's fighting Beterbiev, and I do genuinely think he'll have got him at the perfect time. 2 years ago, maybe would I have backed Callum Smith to beat Beterbiev? I maybe would have, but definitely not as confident as I am now. But yeah, I just think that for me, this is a perfect timing for Callum Smith. One thing I will say though is as well, just before we wrap up or go to predictions, is and this kind of goes against my argument, I suppose, but like Callum Smith, nobody's talking about his inactivity, really. His inactivities were he hasn't been in the ring. Beterbiev has fought more recently than he has. Smith hasn't fought since what 2022, near the end of 2022, on the Joshua Usyk Saudi bill. Yes, he's the younger, fresher man, but again, ring rust there. I don't really like when a fighter spends a lot of time out of the ring, so I'm hoping that doesn't play a factor. But yeah, it kind of is. The only kind of doubt I have in my mind is the activity and potential ring rust of Mundo.
Yeah, it's a concern, and I don't think you're right. Not many people have been discussing that really. Smith he's been inactive, and he's been too inactive to go into a fight of this magnitude, and that's one of my concerns personally. Quick fire predictions, gents. Paul, what section of the fight is Smith going to win this if he wins by stoppage for you?
Yeah, mate, I do think he win by stoppage, and I know we're all having a wee predictions at ESBR, and I'm going to stick to what I said. I think it'll come in the mid rounds.
Yeah.
I think probably round 6, 7, 8 would be my rough kind of grouping of rounds. But yeah, I think mid rounds. I think early. I don't think he'll get Beterbiev out of there early, but I think Smith will be dangerous early on as well. And the longer the fight goes on, I actually think that's worse for Callum Smith.
Cool. And Owen, we'll round things off with you. Prediction ahead of Saturday night.
I'm going again. I'm sticking with what I've said already. Artur Beterbiev, round 8 knockout. I do have to agree, although we're picking different fighters, I think Paul's hit the nail on the head there. The longer this fight goes on, I think the worse it is for Callum Smith. I think, as again, we've seen Beterbiev has got a lot of late knockouts, sort of rounds 8s, 9s, 10s, once they start piling the pressure on. So yeah, I'm sticking with round 8 Beterbiev, and I'm going with a knockout.
Fantastic. Owen, Paul, glad it didn't get too heated. We're all still friends here. We will see. Look, there's one way to settle this debate and see what happens on Saturday night. Artur Beterbiev versus Callum Smith. Thank you both very much for your time.